Drinky all of it.
Okay, we're on item 20. Laura, you're up. Wow,
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Item 20 is an informational update on the development of the Regional Transportation Plan and California Transportation Plan guidelines. The Commission, in partnership with Caltrans, initiated the guidelines update process on June 30th with a kickoff meeting in Sacramento. And first drafts of the guidelines were released for public comment on July 8th. Stakeholder workgroup meetings were then held on July 13th and 14th in Sacramento and on August 11th in Los Angeles. There was extensive participation from a variety of stakeholders at these workgroup meetings. The first round of comments on the draft guidelines were due on August 5th, and Caltrans has reported that over 300 individual comments were submitted by approximately 25 different organizations. A log of all comments received has been posted on Caltrans' website. Caltrans staff is in the process of addressing comments and will be issuing second drafts of the guidelines in mid-September. Stakeholder engagement through workgroup meetings and continued public comment will continue through at least October and longer if needed. Staff anticipates that final RTP and CTP guidelines will be presented to the Commission for consideration in December. I am happy to take any questions. Otherwise, that concludes my update.
Any questions? Thank you very much. Item 21. Eric.
Yes, Commissioners, this is an action item. It actually will begin with a presentation from Mr. Philip Crater of this State Water Resources Control Board, followed by Katrina Pierce with Caltrans. It relates to the State Water Resources Control Board proposed procedures for discharges of dredged or fill materials to waters of the state, or in relative terms, wetland regulations for the state. So I think with that, if Mr. Crater wanted to come and present on the regulations.
Can you hear me okay? Mm-hmm. Good afternoon, Commissioners, Chair Alvarado, and Executive Director Branson. I'm Phil Crater with the State Water Board, Division of Water Quality, and I'm here today to talk about the thing with the long title that he just introduced. It was formerly known as the Wetlands Policy. We've got a different name for it now because the focus has evolved. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here today during the comment period. This is nice to talk with agencies while we're developing and before comments are submitted. We've been working with staff from Caltrans and from the Rail Authority throughout the development, and we look forward to continuing working with those staff as we work on the draft and hopefully move towards getting some procedures adopted early next year. So I'm going to start, if you could advance the slide for me. Or can I advance the slide? Look at that. With some background here. How did we get where we are? Going back probably 20 years or so, if you had a project that was going to discharge dredged or filled material to a water body, you needed to get a permit from the Corps of Engineers under Section 404 and a companion permit from the State Water Board under Section 401, and the footprint of those waters was the same. And in between 2001 and 2006, there were some Supreme Court decisions that clarified the jurisdiction of the federal government over waters, and their footprint of jurisdiction contracted. I've got a Venn diagram. I'm doing a short presentation today, and that's the only picture in the whole thing. So in the past, those circles would have been the same size, and after these court decisions, we were left with a larger circle that represents our jurisdiction at the State Water Board under Porter Cologne Water Quality Control Act. What that means is that some features and wetlands are primarily what we're talking about, but there are other features that used to be protected by both the federal government and the State Water Board were no longer subject to federal jurisdiction. At the time, there was a concern that these wetlands and other water bodies would be left without protections. Our State Water Quality Control Authority is broader than the federal government, and shortly after these decisions, we began regulating impacts to these water bodies under our own authority. We issue what we refer to as waste discharge requirements for these types of projects. So this isn't a new program. This regulatory program has been in place for a number of years, but what's lacked, what we've heard, is consistency in the manner in which the water boards treat these projects. And so from one region to the next, they may evaluate applications differently and issue permits with different requirements. In 2008, our board directed us to develop a statewide policy, including a definition and procedures for evaluating applications. We've gone back and forth. We've released a couple of drafts, and we're continuing to build on what we've heard. And so in 2016, we released the most current draft of the procedures. This draft attempts to protect all waters of the state from dredged or filled discharges. That's been our authority all along. So again, what we're establishing are rules for these discharges, not a new program. We're trying to promote consistency between the state board and the regional boards, and we're doing our best to align with the Corps of Engineers and how they regulate these waters. So if it's a federal water, we're trying to the extent we can to do what the Corps does without duplicating. And if it's a state water that's not subject to their jurisdiction, we're trying to do what they would do if it were a federal water. So an applicant can submit one application for a project, not worrying about whether waters are federal or state, and we will carve the different components of the project into a federal certification or a state permit. So we worked extensively with stakeholders since our 2013 draft, using that as a starting point. And over the last 2 years, intensified our outreach, talking about our goal to come up with a policy that aligned with the federal government. And over the last 6 months or so, we did a lot of focused stakeholder outreach, talking about our proposal, including meeting with Caltrans and the Rail Authority. And we released our procedures, which, with like I said, some exceptions, applies to all waters of the state. And it's largely adopting federal requirements for some of the key things that affect you, such as the alternatives analysis and compensatory mitigation. So we've got a wide range of feedback from stakeholders. There's some acknowledgement of improvements, which people don't tend to dwell on in their comment letters, but there are some things that we're glad to hear are improvements over the previous draft. We're also hearing some concerns, and I've put some bullets here that at a fairly high level summarize what the general concerns are from the stakeholders. One, there's a push to not duplicate other requirements, and that includes what the Corps of Engineers does, what the State Department of Fish and Wildlife does, and what the water boards, I don't have a bullet on here, but what the water boards do with our own permitting programs, like our stormwater permitting program. We've also been pushed to provide more clarity with regard to what is a water of the state. And that's important because if something's a water of the state, it's subject to our authority, and if it isn't, then it's not in need of a permit. Last, we've been asked to reduce or eliminate all the case-by-case determinations, and that's a tough balance to strike. In the past, we've released drafts that had fewer, and stakeholders said, hey, we need more flexibility here. And then when we go the other direction and provide flexibility, people ask for clarity. And so we've already been directed by our board to begin working on solutions to these issues, and we're going to be doing that now. We have coming up here, just going through our schedule, you can see we've been doing some public workshops since we released in June 17th, but the yellow date there is tomorrow. That's when public comments are due, and that's what you guys are considering today. And so after the comments come in, we're going to see what we've heard from everybody else and continue working on those 3 prevailing issues that I mentioned and any other issues that come up. Do our best to come up with procedures that allow us to fulfill our mandate without causing problems for other agencies and their mandates where we can. So right now, we're looking at a spring 2017 consideration for adoption. If the comments and our subsequent conversations with the board result in us making substantive changes, then we're going to release another draft and seek comments again, and that will push the proposed adoption date back, but that's where we're at. And that concludes my brief presentation. I'm going to turn it over to Katrina Pierce, and I'm available if you guys have questions.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. I'm Katrina Pierce, the Chief of the Division of Environmental Analysis with Caltrans, and I was asked to come today and talk about how this new procedures might affect our delivery of transportation projects. Let's see. There we go. So Mr. Crater went through some of the process. Typically for what's going to happen if the procedures are passed as they are is it will affect the process of what we do. Right now, we get, when we impact waters, we get a 404 permit from the federal government, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, and we negotiate with the Corps on impacts to wetlands. We have either the use of a host of nationwide permits, which are fairly straightforward, and the bulk of our projects fall within that permit program. 91% of what we do falls within the nationwide program. And the rest, when there are impacts over 5 acres, we do have a memorandum of understanding with the Army Corps of Engineers to enter into a lot of back and forth to get an individual or standard permit. And then on the state side, if the 404 permit does trigger the need for a 401, so we begin working with the water boards at that point. Some wetlands are also regulated by California Fish and Wildlife, but we're not really going to talk about that today. So the current process, we do environmental documents which evaluate what our project is going to impact. We avoid impacts as much as possible. What we cannot avoid, we minimize, and then we mitigate. So the process starts really at the environmental document stage and flows through the design stage, and then the permitting stage comes after we've determined what our impacts are. Again, Mr. Crater talked about the Supreme Court decisions that eliminated the jurisdiction from the federal government over isolated waters, and so as a result, the water boards have begun to regulate under the Porter-Cologne Act. This is a really simplified graphic that kind of shows those isolated waters that are pretty much the target of the procedures. It is a gray area because waters of the state are also sometimes waters of the U.S., and so it gets technical, but essentially it's those isolated waters there on the right. So the Water Quality Control Board started their efforts back in 2007 when the court cases came. Again, they're proposing to address the gap between the regulation. And we have submitted comments numerous times through the years on various versions of the procedures as well as their environmental document. Also, we did submit comments yesterday on the proposed procedures that are in front of us right now. So the new procedures, if you'll notice at the bottom, as far as process, now the Corps the water boards are asking to get involved and require work that we are already doing for our federal permits. So the new requirements will require applicants to submit alternatives and a LEDPA, which is a least environmentally damaging practical alternative. They want to review that for our projects. And we only do that analysis on those bigger projects. So again, 91% of our projects we don't have to do this for the Corps, so this would be extra work under the Water Board. So, whoops, wow, I went right through that, didn't I? I can't tell which one of these is front and back. Oh, there we go. So basically, our primary concerns are needing more clarification on the definitions and guidelines, and Mr. Crater talked about that. There is ambiguity there in to what extent California wetlands will be subject to the Water Board's jurisdiction over waters of the state. Again, that's kind of a technical area, but it is vague, and we would like to have some clarification. There is a lot of case-by-case language in the procedures and permitting authority, leaving things up to the permitting authority. We work with 9 regional water boards here in California, and we have found that they do act quite independently when we get ready to do our permitting for our projects, and so we don't see consistency there. And we have some concerns that while it sounded like the policies or the procedures really want to look for consistency, they are still leaving a lot up to the individual water boards. But again, Mr. Crater talked about it, that's a difficult balance for them. But it is a red flag for us. The third and fourth bullets there on duplicative requirements and potential additional efforts basically are that LEDPA, that least environmentally damaging practical alternative I spoke of, and the alternatives analysis. We see potential for additional and different field assessments, additional and different alternatives analysis, and duplicative and/or additional mitigation requirements. The LEDPA evaluation for larger projects can take years to do. We typically do it within the process of the environmental document, but for projects where we use nationwide permits for the federal government, we don't do that. I know that there was a question about metrics and what exactly this would mean for us in terms of staffing and time. And we did a very high-level look at the numbers of 401 permits that we get. Again, knowing that 91% of our projects on the federal side are covered by nationwide permits, we anticipated it as the procedures as they currently stand could potentially add up to a half a dozen more staff per year just for environmental. That wouldn't necessarily include resources for hydrologists, design engineers, project managers, or even water board staff to review this extra work that we're doing. And then potentially, because it would require a lot of potentially back and forth because the regional boards are kind of acting on their own, we're anticipating 2 to 8 months delay for each project, which could potentially push projects out construction years. So it's very difficult to really nail down particular metrics here, but these were just pretty high-level estimates that we were able to come up with. So we didn't feel as though the protection there was worth that. So we've actually suggested a lot of proposals to help eliminate that extra work. A couple of other requirements that are in the procedures are climate change analysis, which we really don't do that in permit applications. We do that as part of our environmental work as well as planning. So that just seems like extra work that we shouldn't have to do. It hopefully would be accepted in our environmental documents. Also, there's requirement for compensatory mitigation plans for already approved banks and in lieu fee programs. Those are our favorite things to use because they're already ready to go. We can write a check and move on with our next project, and we don't have to worry about doing mitigation. And those plans or those in lieu fee programs and banks are already approved. They've already had all of that mitigation work done. So we saw that as duplicate work. So our recommendations then finally really are just to provide the clarity, potentially develop a general permit program like the Corps has with their 404s, or just waive this LEDPA requirement for projects. Eliminate other requirements that are covered in some of our other permits. We have a very robust national pollutant discharge permit, our NPDES permit, and our construction general permit that cover a lot of protections. So we would like to work with the water board on showing them what's already covered there and get exemptions for that. And then we are asking for stronger language for the water boards to be more act together more and not be so independent. And if we couldn't have that, perhaps an elevation ladder so that we could quickly elevate problems with the regional boards to the state level and get the problem solved. And then, of course, to hopefully accept and consider our comments in our letter and to continue working with us. And I do believe they're willing to do that, and we will have future conversations as this is developed. So I think both of us are available for questions if you have any.
Any questions for either presenter? Jim, and then Jim.
Okay.
I want to compliment you for trying to make the California State Regional Water Quality Control Board consistent with the regions, because the regions from jurisdiction to jurisdiction impose different rules, and it's very difficult for either the state, the department, or private developers to work with that. So I would encourage the state to continue that effort on all avenues. But my other question has to do with I mean, the Porter Cologne Act was approved a long time ago. What gave it jurisdiction over isolated waters? Where did that come up from?
So Porter Cologne gives the State Water Board jurisdiction over all waters of the state, and waters of the state in Porter Cologne are pretty broadly defined. They include surface water, groundwater, and saline waters that are within our state boundaries. It's a broader jurisdiction and has been since Porter Cologne was adopted.
But
And-
usually isolated waters have to do with endangered species rather than trying to clean up water.
So Porter Cologne, really, it gives us authority just over waters of the state. And regional board and state board interpret what waters of the state means based on the circumstances of the project. We've been doing this since Porter Cologne, almost over 40 years since Porter Cologne was adopted, and it doesn't tend to be really the sticky issue on the project, although in some cases it is a sticky issue. But this is something that in practice we've been doing for many, many years without any guidance beyond what's in Porter Cologne, and the way we've drafted the procedures that we released, it's silent with regard to that. It doesn't propose any change.
Is the current procedure failing?
Failing in what regard?
Are we missing something? I mean, why are we adding extra steps? I'm having trouble following why we're adding these extra steps.
So I think there's a couple things that I can respond to, but one with regard to extra steps. And do you mind if I back up in your presentation, Bill, reach your concerns? There was a comment about regional board involvement early on, and that's one of the things that we're trying to do. There's been a stepwise process for evaluating permits in the past where applicants consult with the Corps of Engineers and they come up with the best project configuration for the waters of the U.S. And after all that's decided, they often go to the regional board to get a 401 certification. And we believe, and we've talked with the Corps, that if we can get the regional board or the state board, the Corps of Engineers and the applicant all talking early on, we can come up with a configuration that will answer everybody's questions, rather than go to the Corps and get one answer and then go to the regional board or state board and potentially get an antagonistic answer. So we're trying to get past that, and we're actually talking with the Corps about developing an MOU that will discuss how we work with the Corps and the applicant early on, and then if the applicant consults with us, or at least the way the procedures are proposed, if the applicant consults with the State Water Board and addresses the State Water Board's concerns on the initial go-round for the federal LEDPA, then the procedures require us to defer to the federal LEDPA on that. So we did try and put some constraints on what additional information we could ask for and how we duplicate process. We're trying to have a complementary process, not a duplicative process. And in terms of one of the other bullets on here, the compensatory mitigation plans is another example where the language may not say what we intended, and that's why we go out to the public and we're working with stakeholders to find out if the language that we proposed doesn't do what we meant for it to do. We think in our own terms, and other people are looking at it from different angles. And so compensatory mitigation plans is a good example. And Katrina's comment about requiring the plans for mitigation banks and in-lieu fee programs, if you read the language plainly, I could see how it would say that, but that's not what we intend. We intend if you've got an in-lieu fee program or a mitigation bank, they've already developed these plans, so you refer to that, and that's the end of it. So there are areas that we think these communications are really going to be helpful for us to revise the draft as we move forward, and there are probably some areas where this is going to identify true issues that we need to bring to our board as policy calls and let our board make the decision.
So who's going to issue the permit, the region or the state?
That process won't be changed. The way it currently works is if a project spans multiple regional board boundaries, then the State Water Board will issue the permit, and if a project is within a regional board, then that region issues the permit.
And what if they don't follow the state guidelines?
The way that we've proposed these, this is one of the changes I referred to briefly. It used to be the wetlands policy, and now it's these procedures. What we're proposing are updates to our state water quality control plans. Those have a different legal effect than a policy. A policy directs the regions to update their plans consistent with the policy, whereas what we're proposing supersedes all regional basin plans and policies immediately once OAL approves it. So if our procedures are adopted by the board and they go to the Office of Administrative Law, they will immediately override any conflicting provisions with the regional boards, and they will be binding on the regional boards.
Jim?
What do you see as your board's role or responsibility in determining what the potential cost of compliance will be?
That's a really good question. We actually just gave an update at the board meeting yesterday to our board on our initiative. I don't know if you're familiar with it. We have a cost compliance initiative that our board has directed staff to undertake for all of our permitting programs, where we're supposed to look at the requirements of the permits, the cost to the permittees, and then what are we doing with whatever we're getting from that cost, reports, monitoring, et cetera. So are we using the information to make decisions that lead to a good environmental outcome? And if so, is the cost and effort kind of commensurate with what we're getting out of it? And so we've been moving through our programs. We're working on, for example, our statewide stormwater program, first and foremost, but that's something that we're being directed by our board to look at in all areas. So we've considered that, what we're doing here. And in drafting the procedures, we looked at, for fiscal year, I think 13-14 and 14-15, the permits that we issued from the regions and the state and kind of what the requirements were, and then what we did with the information that we received, both in the application and then in terms of monitoring and reporting. And what we're trying to do with these procedures is to memorialize the best practices. So if we found practices that some of the regions or state water board staff were using that didn't really have a meaningful outcome but cost money or cost effort, we're trying to eliminate those. And then, like I say, memorialize the best practices. So that's how we're evaluating the cost of compliance. And we really did, when we went through the permitting process, consider at each decision point whether we would always get enough information from the ask of the permittee, or if we might need to ask for more information. And we looked at, again, past applications and permits that we had issued to determine what did we get from the applicant when they gave us what they gave to the Corps. Was it enough for our decision? If so, we bound staff in the draft to defer to the information that was provided to the Corps. If there was a situation where we needed to request more information to make our decision, either under state water law or CEQA, then we allowed discretion in this draft, and we're putting it out to get comments and see where there may be areas for improvement.
Well, I think that's really important that we take a hard look at how we can improve that, because in past years we've gone through a pretty painful process with the State Water Board on the general construction permit and the stormwater. Some of the initial iterations of that were going to cost incredible amounts of money, and there's a benefit to everything. And the question is, sometimes, I'm not saying this is the case with you, but there is this tendency sometimes that when it comes to environmental protection, no cost is too great. And you know what? That's just not real. Because you reach a point where you can spend huge amounts of money for almost no improvement, or else perhaps we're in a system where we're spending, we could do it better, cheaper than we are. And so we have to really look at that. There's just so little money right now to deal with in real improvement, in road improvements and in transportation improvements, that to me, this is a huge issue.
I appreciate the comment, and our board has really stressed the importance to us of not causing applicants to bear undue costs with regard to their compliance. So we're looking into that, and along those lines, I just want to point out we've done a Lean 6 on our 401 certification process. We just had our graduation on that recently, and we're going to be rolling out a process that is cutting the time on that review down to 90 days, which is a considerable improvement. We're going to be rolling that out at the State Water Board, and we're also going to be reporting for the first time this year on performance measures for our program that are output-based. So how long does it take for us to deem an application complete? How long does it take for us to issue a certification once we've completed the application? These are important things to measure this year, and next year we're going to set goals for these and then start trying to ratchet down to reduce the amount of time that applicants spend going through the permitting process. So we're doing a number of different things to try and reduce the cost of compliance to our applicants.
That's great. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Fran,
I have a question. I believe you've extended the comment period by 2 weeks or something like that to get us. But if I look at the math of, you all worked on this particular draft for 3 years, so that's about 1,100 days in round numbers. I just worry that this is complicated, and as Commissioner Arp said, it's really important for us to do a good job with absolutely every dollar we collectively have, whether it's protecting our environment or developing a mobility project. So I want to make sure that we have enough time to think through the best way, and so we don't get ourselves stacked up with unintended consequences that gets us stuck, and we're stuck. And so I just question whether or not 60 days, if that's the time that it's been extended to include, is adequate for everybody to really think through and read. I mean, you mentioned you weren't sure that all of the language was saying exactly what your intent was. So I think it behooves all of us to have some good conversations around, I read a sentence and I understand it one way, you wrote the sentence and you meant it another way, could end up slowing us all down and not really accomplishing anything if we waste time going in circles. So I just wonder if y'all might consider a little more time to really have all of our partners take a look and see if we can accomplish our mutual goals in the most efficient manner. And is this the way? I don't know.
Lucy?
This is kind of a crazy question, but did the board ever consider rolling back the state rules to match the federal rules based on the Supreme Court decision to make it easier and more aligned with the federal rules? You see what I'm asking? You know, make it, instead of making it more complex, simplify the process so that the feds and the state are in alignment?
So that really is an overarching goal of what we're doing. One of the other recommendations on there was to develop a general permitting plan. That's something that our board has directed us to do to the maximum extent that we can use general permits. So we're outside of this procedure, working on developing general permits to approve classes of projects, and this is an opportunity for transportation projects or other linear projects to look at potentially developing general approvals for those permits that would have different requirements than the procedures.
I guess what I'm asking is, the Corps there are now waters that the Corps are not regulating, but the state still wants to step in and regulate. And why wouldn't we just retract and align?
Well, the legislature has directed the water boards to protect those waters, and that's really outside of the purview of this operation.
That's what I was looking for.
Okay.
So that's an overarching policy. The other one that, you know, the questions on cost benefit are important and were asked, but it's not just the cost benefit within the board, but also the agencies and industry sectors outside, their cost benefit analysis. I mean, we've heard from Caltrans, they can't estimate the cost of transportation, and you've heard our commission say, you know, we're funding constrained, so even just complying is adding 5 more people. It's going to cost more now to do projects for maybe de minimis benefit. And I only say that having experience in getting wetlands permits for a road rut, by myself personally, and how you do it because the costs that were attached to the project to permit a road rut was crazy making. And that's, I guess that's the point, is we're in an agency that is single focus to look beyond the fact that we have a housing crisis and it's going to make housing production that much harder. We're constrained in funding and it makes traffic relief that much harder to deliver. I know that's not your job, but I sure wish somebody up there would be connecting the dots on this stuff, because it makes us all a little crazy. We sit up here as volunteers that also work in the private sector. Some of us do. And so I just wanted to share that with you. But I would encourage you to look beyond cost benefit with inside the board and ask for cost benefit analysis as what this is going to do to the other industry sectors that will be impacted by this new system. And last, I really appreciate your comment on mitigation banking, because that is a benefit that has reaped wonderful rewards in many, many areas of the state. And so keeping those intact and the promises made and the promises to be delivered on those without changing the rules, could you clarify your rules on that to match your intent? That would be a great objective. So thank you very much for listening.
Thank you. Any further questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
So Commissioners, the Commission staff has brought to you, this is an action item, brought to you a draft letter, comment letter to send to the State Water Resources Control Board. This draft letter actually, makes primarily high-level comments on the proposal. Primarily two comments. One, to encourage the Water Board to work to reduce regulatory redundancy and costs, as they've discussed. And two, for the Water Board to do an in-depth quantitative analysis of potential costs for this new requirement on other state agencies, not just how the costs might impact the State Water Resources Control Board. And finally, it does, in addition, urge them to address all comments made by stakeholders, including Caltrans. As you know, Caltrans has a pretty lengthy comment letter that they just submitted today, I believe. And so that, with that, Commission staff recommends that the Commissioners approve this letter for comment so that the Commission can comment on these regulations.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Dunn, second by Art. Further questions or discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it. Okay, folks, we're going to have to pick up the pace here a little bit. 22, Stephen?
Yes, Commissioners. Item 22 relates to the asset management plan, performance measures, and targets for the performance measures. We've been struggling with this issue now since probably October of last year, where we've been asking the department to come in and propose proposed targets. In May, the department told us that they really can't do it until the federal rules are finalized, and that those rules should be finalized by August. So they were supposed to be back here in August with the proposed targets for the final rules. The feds, as you heard before on other previous items, have not finalized their rules. Staff and the department work out that the department will be proposing targets based on draft federal rules. When we saw the proposed targets, we asked a few questions. One of them was, what are these targets? What's the basis of some of these targets? Like if a target for poor pavement is 15%, we asked, well, why is it 15% and why is it not 20 and why is it not 10? The department was not able to articulate that. Also, they were asked, what is the fiscal impact of these particular targets? They were not able to answer those questions. They have submitted a letter stating that they really can't come in with any of these things at this meeting. They would like to postpone till October meeting. Staff will be responding with a letter to them, but right now there is no action before the commission because nothing is being proposed.
Okay. Item 23.
Yes, Commissioners. Item 23 is the 2017 Facilities Infrastructure Plan. Last year, when the plan was being presented to you, staff noted that there is lots of needs for facilities. It's about $840 million worth of needs, and office buildings are about $480 million of that. We asked the department to start looking at the office buildings and those type of needs and start preliminary work. There is nothing in the actual report that addresses that, but I believe the department is ready to address those issues in their presentation. So Lance is here to provide the presentation.
Thank you. Once again, my name is Lance Hibben. I'm representing Caltrans Administration Program with the Division of Business Facilities and Security. And I'm here to talk to you today about our facility building assets, and more specifically, our 2017 Caltrans Facility Infrastructure Plan. Just a quick overview of what we're going to talk about. We're going to go over why we do these reporting, this plan and the reporting requirements, the relationship between the program SHOPP and the SHOPP 10-year plan, the summary of projects that we have in the FIP, an overview of the existing condition of Caltrans office buildings, and what our next steps are. Basically, we're required to present the facility infrastructure plan, which I'm also going to refer to as the FIP, to report annually to the Department of Finance, and that report is primarily focused on office buildings. However, Caltrans also includes our transportation-related facilities. The next slide here basically shows a high overview of the relationship between the various plans that are produced, the 2015 10-year SHOPP plan, the 2016 4-year program SHOPP, and this year and last year's FIP. Basically, the next slide will show a little bit more detail on how these plans intersect with different funding stages, such as this year we have changed the look to include this slide of the project summaries to highlight how the facilities infrastructure plan will align itself with the 2017 SHOPP 10-year plan and ultimately the asset management plan. The first 3 years of the FIP are comprised of the last 3 years of the program SHOPP. This is the same for the 10-year SHOPP, and the final 2 years of the FIP are candidate projects that are in preparation for the next programming cycle. These projects coincide with the 2018 PID work plan. This year, we're also providing a listing of our unfunded needs, and which span beyond the 5 years of the FIP. These projects will align with the last 5 years of the 2017 10-year SHOPP unconstrained plan. So this next slide provides a little bit more details. We're looking at $81.4 million in the FIP project summary as far as projects. This includes the projects that are both in the 2016 SHOPP fiscal years, the 2017 fiscal infrastructure plan, and the 2018 SHOPP candidate projects. This includes $57.6 million in total capital costs and $23.9 million in support costs. The next slide basically shows, it focuses on the unfunded needs. Basically, the total unfunded needs for Caltrans facilities assets is $839 million. Of that, about half of that, or $482 million, is on office facilities. The next slide basically shares a breakdown of that $482 million in the 6 buildings in our portfolio that are over 50 years old. This doesn't include District 1 because we had a recent project up there to bring that building closer to standards. The next slide shows our entire portfolio, both the buildings that are above 50 years old, which is sort of a industry standard as to measuring life cycles for buildings, and those buildings that are also under 50 years old. And so you can kind of see visually there how many are on which side of the line. The next slide shows us the differences in how office buildings, oops, what happened here? There we go. How office buildings, the process that is used for funding and planning projects. So basically, office buildings go through state control agencies, such as the Department of General Services, Department of Finance, and the Public Works Board. That makes us a little bit different from transportation-related facilities that go through internal processes and such as the PID. Here's where it gets a little interesting. So the last few years, there's been more and more attention based on office facilities. These three reports that you have before you are about the DGS portfolio. And essentially what they're highlighting is that there are problems with the DGS portfolio. Now, Caltrans buildings are not part of the DGS portfolio. Some of these reports talk about a $138 million deferred maintenance that DGS has on its portfolio. These reports were published by the Legislative Analyst's Office, Department of General Services themselves, and the Bureau of State Audits. As a result, the governor has funded $1.5 billion to address DGS's portfolio issues. Unfortunately, Caltrans, again, is not part of their portfolio and was not included in these reports or in the funding that was given by the governor. Getting closer to home, Caltrans, we have our own challenges. We struggle to operate and maintain our portfolio and our deferred maintenance, as evidenced by our deferred maintenance problems. Caltrans needs resources to replace, operate, and maintain our office portfolio more effectively. This includes replacement of assets older than 50 years old, as well as properly maintaining assets that are under 50 years old. You may recall, or you may be familiar with our District 7 office, where we've had some issues where we've had to invest some funding, and included in that was a consulting report that we received, and that consulting report essentially is we're going to be using it as a template or a roadmap for helping us create standards or guidelines for maintaining all our portfolios statewide. Some of our challenges are basically getting the funding for basically the headquarters building. Right now, we're working with a consultant to complete an update study for our headquarters facility infrastructure plan. And we're also planning to contract with a contractor to perform a statewide condition assessment to help prioritize other facilities that are over 50 years old. Our long-term plan is to basically develop a concept paper to submit to the control agencies like Department of Finance, and a capital outlay budget change proposal to help secure funding to address some of these needs. The constraints that we have, and they've been talked about already a little bit, is that we're competing for funds that are for bridges and highways, and so that's those are tough competition to secure the funding for the headquarters project, for example. Some of these facility infrastructure issues make it challenging to address requirements related to conservation, governor's roadmap to, such as B 1812. We're doing what we can on conserving water. We are in the process of getting 9 of our 12 buildings, trying to get them up to LEED certification. We also have installed recently LED lights to help in energy savings as well. So we're doing what we can with what we have. With that, that's the end of my presentation. Are there any questions?
Lance, thank you. On that last one, those 3 bullet items, reducing water, the LEED stuff and installing energy-efficient lighting. Two of those seem probably fairly inexpensive to accomplish, the water usage and the lighting. Have you put any numbers to retrofitting to LEED standards? That's pretty expensive, isn't it?
Well, as you may know, there are a number of different LEED certifications, and the certifications that we're mostly focusing on operations and maintenance, and so they get into things like cleaning products for custodians,
Okay.
Things that, what kinds of products and other kinds of procedures that we're using to maintain and operate the buildings. But you're right. I mean, there are other opportunities for LEED certification, such as changing out water closets in the restrooms. And one of the challenges that we have with that is we have in the past tried to use water-reducing valves to reduce the amount of water that's going into the water closets or the toilets, and essentially the older designs don't do well with less water, and so people tend to flush more often, which kind of defeats the purpose.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Just a quick, I mean, the challenge that I have with these kind of reports is, I mean, you give us kind of an overview of everything, but I don't know what to make of it. I mean, I don't see any recommendations. I mean, I see your next steps, so to speak, and it's mainly has to do with updating different reports and so forth. I guess my question is, what is it you want to do with this information, other than say, geez, we got a lot of big infrastructure needs in our facilities, and it competes with everything else.
Yeah.
That's a problem.
Well, the first step is to continue to try to do our best with what we have to work with and do it most efficiently in the most best way. But the other thing is to keep identifying the need that we have these facilities that are going to fail. The headquarters building is over 80 years old, and I know that it's a matter of time. And so I guess what I'm trying to emphasize is the need to look at and support funding for these projects.
Have we looked, did you include in your assessment whether or not in some cases it makes more sense to just relinquish the property and lease?
Yeah, we're
From a
looking.
cash flow standpoint?
We're looking at all options. I mean, refurbishment. We're trying to look at replacement. We're looking at leasing and 3Ps. But until we get more further along with a commitment on funding, it's hard to take those strategies to our control agencies such as DGS and Finance. We have started talking with Finance about funding strategies, and we plan to continue those conversations. But that's about where we're at right now.
I guess if I were someone that you were trying to pitch in terms of, why you need funding, basically, I don't know that this would do it for me, other than the fact that, everybody's short of cash.
Yeah.
So I guess the question is, what specific alternatives are you laying out that either, that it would force somebody to say, look, we got to do something. I just don't see it. And so I find these kinds of reports a little frustrating sometimes. Sorry.
Okay, I understand. I do. I know that there are opportunities that new buildings will provide us to be more operationally efficient throughout the department. Excuse me. And I think that would also have a better service delivery to projects that are on a road and bridges.
At local government level and regional, there are many different investors who are looking at lease financings of public buildings. And once you put out some kind of an RFP involving some of these substantial buildings and where there is a need for a large facility usually you get tremendous response. Now, I know we've been recently through a very difficult time in terms of construction, but at this point, there's so much construction going on, and there is such an interest in lease financings. It would seem to me that there should be some feelers out, or even something very formal in terms of making available some of the information and the needs to see if there is a response. I suspect there would be a response. In fact, when we go to this reception, we'll probably run into a number of people if that's what they do, and would just love to be involved in some of these buildings. So I would encourage you to go back and come up with a strategy for how you can make it very attractive. And it's not a matter of you spending more money. It's simply a matter of you keeping the present amount that you're spending and maybe reducing it if you're talking about getting to a platinum building, and indicate that you have an interest in that.
I agree, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good report, very, very interesting, but it's a endlessly frustrating topic. Right here in San Diego, and these are not transportation buildings, but our downtown state office building on Front Street. I think some of the original plans on, moving the workers out, demoing the building, relocating, et cetera, go back to Duke Majan's administration. And it's almost as long with the Hillcrest Department of Motor Vehicles on Normal Street. I mean, bills get passed and, but there's never the right amount of money at the right time. And we, as some of the other members have said, we miss opportunities to do it when the market is favorable. And then, we don't have the cash on hand when we need it. So, I mean, I appreciate the information. I'm going to take a look at those documents because I'm dying to see what DGS says in their matrix there.
Yes.
But I'd love to know how many have actually been built anywhere in the state besides maybe
You're
the
referring to the
Trans Bay or something.
DGS portfolio?
Yeah.
Yeah, I can't comment on that.
Yes, the question was asked, why is this stuff really before you guys? Well, the department has a very hard time articulating these needs, and we are kind of using the commission's forum to bring these needs up out of the basement so they become apparent. In previous plans, buildings were not even mentioned. Office buildings were not even mentioned. Now they are starting to be mentioned. The department is starting to examine strategies, and one of the strategies I've heard even Lance mentioned here is a P3 type of a strategy on an office building, especially on the Sacramento office building, where you probably could get into a partnership with a private developer who could build you swing space so people could be moved out of the building. The building gets gutted, people get moved back, and there's some kind of payment over time to the developer for renting back the space. So you are not hit with a huge bill at once, you get to pay this over time. So the commission forum here is really working its magic to bring these things forward and start people addressing these things that previously were not even talked about because they were just too dangerous to talk about. But I have to commend the department for bringing this forward and starting to identify the issues.
Commissioners, tab 24 is an action item to update the Commission's delegation of authority to the Department for funding emergency response projects. The update is necessary to align the delegations in Resolution G11 with the Commission's new responsibilities for the SHOPP. Updates include Department authority to allocate capital outlay support for emergency response projects, Department responsibilities for managing the annual emergency reservation established in the Commission-adopted SHOPP, and finally, Department responsibility for year-end closeout reporting. Staff recommends your approval.
Motion by Tavaloni, second by Burke. Further questions, discussion? All in favor, please say aye. Opposed? Ayes have it. Item 25, Don.
Yes, item 25 is an action item to amend the TCIF program by adding the Middle Harbor redevelopment project in Los Angeles County with $12.6 million of TCIF funds. Staff recommends approval.
Second.
Motion by Tavaloni, second by Inman. Further questions? All in favor, please say aye. Opposed? Ayes have it. Item 26, Don.
Item 26 is an action item to amend the TCIF baseline agreement for the Monte Vista Grade Separation Project to update the schedule and funding plan. Staff recommends approval.
Second.
Tavaloni with the motion, Dunn with the second. Further questions? All in favor, please say aye. Opposed? Ayes have it. Item 27.
27 is an action item, and this is the second amendment to a TCIF baseline agreement for the Avenue 66 Railroad Grade Separation Bypass Project to update the schedule and funding plan. Staff recommends approval.
Motion by Tavaloni, second by Burke. Further questions? All in favor, please say aye. Opposed? Ayes have it. Information calendar, Stephen.
Yes, Commissioners, the next 7 items, item 28 through 34 are information items. There is a change here. Item 34 is actually not an information item, it's an action item. It's being moved from information calendar to the consent calendar. With that said, if none of these items will be presented unless specifically requested by a commissioner.
Okay, consent calendar.
Yes, Commissioners, the next 11 items, 35 through 45, are consent items. We need to add item 34 to this lineup, and there are changes on item 38. Under item 38, we are now we have 5 resolutions of necessity. Resolution C 21477 is pulled. Under item 39, Director's Deed 084848-01-01 is actually is a Fresno 180 route, not a Fresno 168. And under item 40, we are pulling that item totally off of the agenda. With these changes, staff recommends approval of the consent calendar.
Was that, Gardina, did you? Motion by Gardina, second by Tavaloni. Further questions? All those in favor, please say aye. Opposed? Ayes have it. We can go to item 48.
Good afternoon, Chair, Commissioners, members of the public. Item 48 is an action item. This is the final EIR for the Cleanup Roadside Environment Safety Project to remove trees and utility poles on a 4-mile section between King City and Greenfield on Route 101 in Monterey County. Caltrans has certified the benefits outweigh the environmental impacts by creating a safer roadside environment and by reducing the potential of falling limbs and debris on the highway. Staff recommends your approval.
Motion by Gilmetti, second by Dunn. Further questions? In favor, please say aye. Opposed? Ayes have it. Jose, 49.
Item 49 is an action item. This is the final EIR for the Hollister to Gilroy State Route 25 route adoption. Caltrans has certified that the environmental impacts have been mitigated to less than significant. Staff recommends your approval.
Gilmetti with the motion, Tavaloni with the second. Further questions? All in favor, please say aye. Opposed? Ayes have it. Item 50.
Item 50 is an action item. This is the final EIR for the Orange County streetcar project between Santa Ana and Garden Grove. The City of Santa Ana on July 21st certified that the benefits outweigh the environmental impacts by providing alternative mobility options, enhancing the community's economic vitality and redevelopment opportunities, and fostering a transit-oriented focus for the region. Staff recommends your approval.
Motion by Dunn, second by Tavaloni. Further questions? All in favor, please say aye. Opposed? Ayes have it. Item 51.
Item 51 is an action item. This is the final EIR for the State Route 89 Fanny Bridge Community Revitalization Project, route adoption, and future consideration of funding. The Tahoe Transportation District on July 15, 2016, certified that the impacts related to construction and implementation activities could be mitigated to less than significant levels. Staff recommends your approval.
So moved.
Arp with the motion, second by Gilmetti. Further questions? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Ayes have it. Item 52.
Yes, Commissioners. Item 52 is the route adoption that follows the previously approved environmental document. Staff recommends approval.
Motion by Tavaloni, second by Gilmetti. Further questions? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Ayes have it. We'll do 57 through 61 and we'll call it a day. Item 57, Rick.
Commissioners, item 57 is a request to amend 31 projects into the 2014 SHOPP. These are the emergency response projects allocated by the department under delegated authority in late May and June 2016. The majority of these projects are for the removal of large numbers of dead and dying trees as a result of drought and bark beetle. Staff has reviewed all the projects and recommends your approval.
So moved.
Arp with the motion, Dunn with the second. Further questions? In favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Ayes have it. Item 58.
Commissioners, item 58 is a request to amend 25 new projects into the 2016 SHOPP. These new projects are within existing reservations established in the adopted SHOPP. Please note, after review and consultation with the department, 2 safety projects in Los Angeles have reduced delivery time by 1 year as noted in the change list. Staff has reviewed all the projects and recommends your approval.
Tavaloni with the motion, Dunn with the second. Further questions? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Ayes have it. Item 59, Teresa.
Commissioners, item 59 is an action item. This is a STIP amendment request. MTC, CCAG, and San Mateo County Transportation Authority propose to advance their US 101 Willow Interchange project through an AB 3090 cash reimbursement project. The AB 3090 cash reimbursement project is proposed to be programmed over 2 years, beginning in fiscal year 1920. This item was noticed at the May Commission meeting and is consistent with STIP guidelines. Staff recommends you approve the STIP program amendment.
Gilmetti with the motion, second by Tavaloni. Any further questions? All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Ayes have it. Item 60.
Commissioners, item 60 is an information item. This is a STIP amendment for notice. MTC, CCAG, and the San Mateo County Transportation Authority are requesting to advance with local funds their State Route 92 and 82 interchange project that is currently programmed in 1718. And they would like to program an AB 3090 cash reimbursement project in a later year. Since you approved a policy early today where you can you approved to allocate the, hold on. Under earlier today, you approved a policy where projects that had been delayed in the 2016 STIP to later years, we could advance them. This is a good example of a project that is ready to go, and because now that you are able to advance it, they could possibly come back in October for allocation. So they're amending it. Right now it's for notice, it's not in action, so they'll possibly come back in October for thank you.
Thank you. Item 61.
Yes, Commissioners, item tab 61 is an action item. This request is for a project amendment and an allocation amendment for the Tier 1 TCRP Pacific Surfliner project. $1.3 million in construction savings will be deallocated from Segment 9 of the project and reallocated to Segment 11 of the project. And Segment 11 will be amended to include some additional work needed. Staff recommends approval.
So moved.
Arp with the motion, Dunn with the second. And the questions? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Ayes have it. I changed my mind. We're going to do 66 and 67 just to get rid of the page.
Thank you. Commissioners, tab 66 is an action item requesting $725 million for the allocation of 70 SHOPP projects. These are the projects from the 2014 SHOPP that received a 2-month allocation extension at the June 2016 meeting. These projects are delivered and ready for allocation. Staff has reviewed all the projects and recommends your approval.
Second.
Motion by Tavaloni, second by Art. Any further questions? All in favor, please say aye. Opposed? Ayes have it. Item 67.
Commissioners, item 67 is an action item requesting $3.475 million for the allocation of 1 SHOPP project. The project will accomplish required mitigation in Pacifica for the Devil Slide Tunnel. Staff recommends your approval.
Motion by Tavaloni, second by Gardino. Any further questions? All in favor, please say aye. Opposed? Ayes have it. Okay, we'll adjourn for the day, and we'll start off tomorrow morning with item 46.